Welcome to Urban American Stories. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. The sharp ring of the telephone cut through the morning silence as William Harrison watched his cornfield from the kitchen window. It was Charles Wilson's 12th call that month, and like all the previous ones it ended without an answer. The Harrison farm existed long before the standardized houses and white picket fences of the Maple Creek Homeowners Association settled on the surrounding land, and William had no intention of changing that. The 200-acre property in Lebanon, Indiana, carried on the legacy of three generations. The red barn built by his grandfather in 1945 still stood firm against the Midwest winds. The height marks of William and his siblings remained engraved on the kitchen doorframe, silent witnesses to the time when their mother was still alive to measure them. Dad, Mr. Wilson, left another envelope in the mailbox, said Amanda Harrison, his 19-year-old daughter, entering the kitchen with a freshly brewed coffee, her brown hair in a ponytail swayed as she leaned over to kiss her father's cheek. William picked up the envelope with calloused hands, recognizing the golden HOA logo in the top corner. Inside was yet another development proposal, this time offering 20% above market value for the property. The paper went straight into the garbage can along with the 11 previous proposals. They don't give up, muttered William, taking a sip of his daughter's coffee. The summer of 2023 was proving particularly difficult for Lebanon's farmers. Drought had been punishing the region for 3 months, and the weather forecast held out no hope of rain. William had invested in a modern irrigation system the previous year, a decision that was now proving providential, keeping his plantation alive while other properties in the region were struggling to survive. Charles Wilson watched the Harrison success with growing frustration from his office at the HOA. The association he had chaired for 5 years was expanding, and the Harrison's farm was the only obstacle in his development plan. The uniform houses of Maple Creek surrounded the property on 3 sides like patient predators waiting for the right moment to pounce. He refused again, Charles informed David Thompson, vice president of the association, during their weekly meeting. That farm is ruining the aesthetics of our urban planning. Buyers don't want to see tractors and farm equipment from the window of their $500,000 homes. David adjusted his navy blue tie, a nervous habit that intensified when his boss was upset. Technically, they were here first, Charles, and state law protects historic agricultural properties. Laws can be circumvented, David. We just need to be creative. The next morning, William found Amanda checking the security cameras they had installed after a series of suspicious accidents on the property: cut fences, damaged equipment, unexplained problems with the irrigation system. Dad, you need to see this, Amanda called out, her fingers moving quickly over the computer keyboard. The images from the night before showed 2 figures sneaking along the boundary of the property. Even in the low light, it was possible to recognize Charles Wilson and David Thompson unloading something from a truck. William felt his stomach turn when hours later the first fire broke out in that exact spot. The fire spread quickly through the parched vegetation, threatening to reach the cornfields and the historic barn. 3 fire departments had to be mobilized to control the flames. As he watched the smoke rising from his scorched land, William Harrison made a decision. For 3 generations, his family had cultivated not just crops, but values: integrity, perseverance, justice. It was time to show Charles Wilson that some roots are too deep to pull out. Call Susan Mitchell, he told Amanda, referring to the family lawyer. It's time for us to fight their way. Susan's office in downtown Lebanon was a striking contrast to the simplicity of the farm. Dark wood furniture and framed diplomas decorated the walls, but the lawyer's warm smile made William feel at home. We have solid evidence, Susan explained, analyzing the camera footage. Breaking and entering damage to property, attempted arson. Charles Wilson made a serious mistake by underestimating you. William looked out of the office window in the direction of his farm. He could see the top of the red barn in the distance, a sight that always brought him comfort. I don't just want money, Susan. I want them to understand that they can't just ride rushod over people to get what they want. And they won't, Susan assured her voice carrying the confidence of 2 decades of experience in real estate law. We're going to turn this into a landmark case. As he drove home, William thought of his father and grandfather, how they had fought their own battles to keep the land in the family. Now it was his turn to protect that legacy, not just for himself or Amanda, but for all the families facing pressure from associations that confuse progress with uniformity. The sun was setting over Lebanon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red reminiscent of the flames of the day before, But this time William Harrison no longer felt like a victim of circumstance. The war declared by Charles Wilson was about to turn into a legal battle that would shake the foundations of the Maple Creek HOA, and William was prepared to fight to the bitter end. The photographs spread out on Susan Mitchell's office desk told a clear story of premeditation. The security camera images printed in high resolution showed Charles Wilson and David Thompson at different angles, their expressions partially illuminated by the truck's headlights as they poured gallons of flammable liquid on the border of the Harrisons' property. "We have something even more interesting," Amanda said, sliding her laptop across the mahogany desk. "I found emails exchanged between HOA board members discussing ways to persuade resistant homeowners." Her deft fingers navigated through a series of compromising messages. "They have a pattern, Dad. We're not the first." Susan adjusted her gold-framed glasses, her green eyes quickly scanning the content of the screen. "That changes everything. We're no longer just talking about property damage, but a systematic conspiracy. We can turn this into a class action." William shifted in his leather chair, uncomfortable with the idea of a larger lawsuit. "I don't want to become a symbol of resistance, Susan. I just want to protect my land. Sometimes protecting what's ours means fighting for something bigger." Susan replied, her voice carrying the weight of experience. "I've met 3 other homeowners who have faced similar situations with the Maple Creek HOA. In the last 2 years, they all lost their properties after mysterious accidents." The office fell silent as William absorbed the information through the window. He could see the movement of downtown Lebanon, people going about their normal lives oblivious to the silent war raging on the city limits. Marcus Rodriguez. Susan continued, opening a folder. "He lost his Mexican restaurant after electrical problems caused a fire. Barbara Chin forced to sell her antique store after repeated acts of vandalism. And Robert Winters, a Vietnam veteran who ended up hospitalized after his blood pressure spiked during a confrontation with HOA inspectors." Amanda typed furiously on her laptop, correlating dates and events. "Dad, look at this. All the incidents happened after they turned down offers to buy the Maple Creek Development Corporation, which, surprise, is chaired by Charles Wilson." William stood up and walked over to the window, his work boots contrasting with the Persian carpet of the office. The reflection in the glass showed a different man from the farmer he had always been. The last few days had hardened something inside him. "What do you suggest, Susan?" The lawyer smiled, the kind of smile that precedes a perfect storm. "First, we file a restraining order against the HOA, preventing any contact with your property. Then we presented evidence to the district attorney. This goes beyond the civil sphere. It's a criminal investigation." "What about the other owners?" asked Amanda. "I've contacted them all. They're willing to testify, but they're afraid. Charles Wilson has powerful connections in the city council." William turned back to the room, his mind made up. "Then let's expose those connections too, Amanda. Do you still have contact with that friend of yours from the Lebanon Daily News?" "Michael, yes, he's always after a good story." "Great," Susan interjected. "But let's get this right. First the legal proceedings, then the press. We don't want to give Wilson any chance to claim persecution." The rest of the afternoon was spent organizing documents and structuring the legal strategy. Susan worked together with her team to prepare the initial petitions, while Amanda meticulously cataloged every piece of digital evidence. On the way back to the farm, William stopped at the local gas station. Jerry, the sexagenarian owner, greeted him with genuine concern. "I heard about the fire bill. Shame what they're doing to you." William nodded, filling his glass with black coffee. "Things are going to change, Jerry, one way or another. Be careful. I hear Wilson has some big people behind him, Indianapolis construction companies, politicians. That's exactly why someone needs to stand up to him." When he got home, William found another envelope from the HOA in his mailbox. This time, it was a formal notice alleging code violations for improper maintenance of vegetation and risk to public safety. The suggested fine was astronomical. Amanda examined the document with indignation. "They can't do this. They have no jurisdiction over our property." "They don't," William confirmed. "But that's how they work. Constant pressure, veiled threats until they get what they want." That evening, father and daughter sat on the porch, as they had done since Amanda was a little girl. The air still carried the smell of smoke from the fire, a lingering reminder of what was at stake. "Do you know what your grandmother used to say?" asked William, gazing at the partially burnt fields. "That good land isn't just land that produces good crops, but land that's worth fighting for." Amanda rested her head on her father's shoulder. "And this one is, isn't it? More than they realize, dear, more than they realize." The next morning, the first court summons would be delivered to Charles Wilson, kicking off a battle that would shake the power structures in Lebanon. The war for the Harrison farm was just beginning, and William was determined to prove that some things like dignity, justice, and the right to protect what is yours are priceless. News of the lawsuit against the Maple Creek HOA spread through Lebanon like fire. Through dry straw, the Lebanon Daily News published a front-page story detailing the charges against Charles Wilson and David Thompson, including testimony from former homeowners who had lost their properties. Under suspicious circumstances, Michael Rodriguez, Amanda's young reporter friend, had done a meticulous job connecting the dots between the different stories of intimidation. Pattern of coercion, local HOA accused of criminal tactics, was the headline that made Charles Wilson choke on his breakfast. That's defamation, cried Charles on the phone to his lawyer Richard Palmer of the prestigious Palmer & Associates in Indianapolis. I want to sue this newspaper to the last page. Calm down, Charles. Palmer replied, his voice calculatingly calm. Suing the press now will only add credibility to the accusations. We need to be strategic. In Susan Mitchell's office, the legal team was working tirelessly. Barbara Chin, the former owner of the antique store, had brought a box of documents proving a series of infractions faked by the HOA. Robert Winters, still recovering from his nervous breakdown, provided audio recordings of board meetings where Charles openly discussed pressure tactics against problem homeowners. They're mounting a defense based on plausible deniability. Susan informed William during an update meeting. Palmer is trying to argue that Wilson and Thompson were just inspecting the area when they were filmed and that the fire was a tragic coincidence. Amanda, who had become a tireless investigator, interrupted with new findings. I found something on Thompson's wife's social media. She quickly deleted it, but I managed to get a screenshot. The image showed a private message in which she was bragging to a friend about how her husband and Charles would finally find a way to wipe that ugly farm off the map. The criminal investigation was also beginning to take shape. Detective Marcus Hayes of the Lebanon Police Department was not a man to be intimidated by political positions or connections. His thorough investigation revealed that the Maple Creek Development Corporation had made substantial contributions to local political campaigns, always followed by expedited approvals of their development projects. Mr. Harrison Hayes said during a visit to the farm, "We found residues of chemical accelerant at the site of the fire. The same compound is sold in only 3 stores in the county, and we have surveillance footage showing Thompson buying several gallons a week before the incident." William watches partially burnt land as he talked to the detective. Green shoots were already beginning to emerge among the ashes, a metaphor for the resilience his family had always shown. "I don't just want justice, detective. I want to make sure they can never do that to anyone again." The pressure began to show results. David Thompson was the first to crack. After a particularly intense interrogation conducted by Hayes, he approached the district attorney's office offering a plea bargain. Wilson planned the whole thing. Thompson confessed, his hands shaking as he signed his statement. "It wasn't just the Harrison farm. We have a roadmap to put pressure on resistant landowners. First the fines, then the accidents until they can't take it anymore and sell." Thompson's confession hit the HOA board like a bombshell. Members began resigning in droves, fearful of being implicated in the scheme. Charles Wilson, feeling the siege closing, and tried one last desperate gamble. $1 million he offered William during an unexpected meeting at Jerry's coffee shop. In cash, no questions asked, just withdraw the file and get on with your life. William didn't even blink. "My grandmother used to say that some things are priceless, Mr. Wilson. Dignity is one of them." The case took on a statewide dimension when the Indiana Attorney General's office announced a broader investigation into predatory practices by HOAs across the state. The small conflict in Lebanon had become the fuse for a much larger discussion about the limits of these associations' power. Susan Mitchell seized the moment to expand the class action to include dozens of other homeowners who had suffered similar abuses in different counties. "This isn't just about your farm anymore, William. It's about setting a precedent that protects people all over the state." Amanda, who had begun considering a career in law after her immersion in the case, started organizing meetings with other young farmers in the region. "We need to unite," she argued. "If we let these corporations swallow up our land one by one, soon there won't be any family farms left in Indiana." As fall approached, the Harrisons' cornfields began to recover. William hired a local environmental restoration company to assess the damage and develop a recovery plan. The cost would be included in the process, but for him, seeing his land heal was more important than any financial compensation. One evening, while father and daughter were sharing a quiet moment on the veranda, Amanda noticed something different on the horizon. "Dad, look." Dozens of cars were approaching the farm, their headlights forming a procession on the dirt road. They were the neighbors. Farmers, local merchants, and even former residents of the HOA-controlled area. They brought food tools, and most importantly, their solidarity. Jerry from the gas station had organized a joint effort to help restore the property. "You're not alone in this fight," said Jerry, handing William a still warm apple pie. Lebanon was always a community before it was a real estate development. Observing this spontaneous show of support, William felt that regardless of the outcome of the case, he had already won. Something much more valuable, the reaffirmation that some battles are worth fighting, not just for ourselves, but for all those who will come after. District Attorney Benjamin Walsh's office was buzzing with activity. That Thursday morning, David Thompson's confession had triggered a series of investigations that went far beyond the Harrison case. Documents, testimony, and electronic evidence revealed a much larger scheme of corruption and intimidation. "We have records of suspicious wire transfers between the Maple Creek Development Corporation and 3 city council members," Walsh explained to Susan Mitchell and William Harrison during a private meeting. "The pattern of payments coincides perfectly with controversial project approvals over the past 3 years." Susan flipped through a folder full of bank statements and tax returns. "And the most interesting thing, all these transactions went through a shell company in the Cayman Islands, registered 2 days after Charles Wilson took over as president of the HOA." William looked at the figures with a mixture of anger and sadness. Each line of those documents represented one more family under pressure, one more family business destroyed, one more piece of the community transformed into standardized condominiums. "The FBI is taking over part of the investigation," Walsh continued. "This goes far beyond Lebanon. Now, we've found connections to similar developments in 3 other counties." Amanda, who had become a constant presence at the legal meetings, was typing furiously on her laptop. "I found something," she announced, turning the screen to those present. "Charles Wilson worked for a real estate developer in Phoenix 5 years ago. Guess what? Same pattern of mysterious accidents followed by forced takeovers." The investigation gained momentum when Barbara Chin, still shaken by the loss of her antique store, found old VHS tapes from security cameras. The grainy footage showed David Thompson and other HOA members vandalizing her property in the wee hours of the morning, weeks before the electrical accident that destroyed her business. "It wasn't just about money," Barbara explained, her voice shaking as she relived the memories. "They wanted to erase everything that didn't fit the image they were selling. My store, with its old pieces and history, didn't fit in with the modern aesthetic they were planning." Barbara's statement sparked a wave of demonstrations, and Lebanon residents began to question how many other similar stories remained buried under layers of intimidation and fear. Jerry from the gas station organized a community meeting that filled the local church hall. "We can't let them destroy the soul of our town," he declared to the crowd. "Lebanon is not just a collection of identical houses and white picket fences. It's about people's stories and traditions." Charles Wilson, feeling the siege closing, and tried one last desperate maneuver through his lawyer. He offered a deal that included restitution of damages and a substantial sum in exchange for dropping the charges. "No way," was William's immediate response. "This has never been about money, it's about justice." The pressure began to affect the core of the conspiracy. Richard Palmer, Wilson's lawyer, approached the prosecutor's office, offering information in exchange for immunity. His confession revealed an elaborate scheme of bribes, falsification of documents, and systematic intimidation. Wilson was not alone, Palmer revealed. There was a corporate script used. In different cities, identify target properties, create artificial problems, pressure, until the owner gives up, all calculated to maximize profits in real estate developments. Amanda turned her findings into a blog that quickly gained a nationwide following. "Preserving Our History" became a virtual meeting place for victims of similar tactics, revealing a nationwide pattern of abuse by HOAs and developers. The FBI expanded its investigation, connecting the dots between different cases in several states. Agents specializing in financial crimes uncovered a complex network of shell companies and suspicious transactions that stretched across the American Midwest. William spent more time in court than on his farm, but the community mobilized to help. Neighbors took turns caring for the plantation, while volunteers worked to restore the burned areas. "Do you know what impresses me the most?" commented Amanda one evening while organizing more evidence. "How a single decision to resist can trigger something so much bigger than ourselves." Susan Mitchell, who had become more than a lawyer for the Harrisons, agreed. "Sometimes you need someone willing to say no, to expose a whole corrupt system." The investigations revealed that the Maple Creek Development Corporation was just the tip of the iceberg. Leaked documents exposed a nationwide network of real estate speculation that used HOAs as pressure tools to force property acquisitions. The Harrison case had become a catalyst for significant change. State legislators began discussing bills to limit the powers of HOAs and protect historic homeowners. Investigative journalists from all over the country converged on Lebanon, turning the small town into a symbol of resistance against corporate greed. Charles Wilson was last seen boarding a flight to the Bahamas, but federal agents had already frozen his accounts and issued a warrant for his arrest. David Thompson, fulfilling his part of the plea bargain, continued to reveal details that further strengthened the case. The Harrison farm, although still scarred by the fire, was beginning to show signs of recovery. New shoots were emerging from the burnt areas, symbolizing the resistance and renewal that characterized not only the property, but the entire community of Lebanon. The Boone County Courthouse was packed on the morning of the final trial. Reporters from various parts of the country crowded into the historic halls of the building, all eager to witness the outcome of the case that had become a national symbol of the fight against corporate abuse. William Harrison adjusted his tie, the same one he had worn at his late wife's wedding, as he watched Charles Wilson being escorted into the room by federal agents. The former HOA president, captured during his escape attempt in the Bahamas, looked smaller in his orange prison jumpsuit. Ready, whispered Susan Mitchell, organizing her documents one last time on the prosecution table. "I was born prepared," replied William, his voice carrying the weight of generations of Harrisons who had defended that land before him. Judge Eleanor Matthews, known for her firm stance against white-collar crime, began the proceedings. The case had expanded far beyond the initial arson. It now included charges of racketeering, tax fraud, conspiracy, and violations of the RICO Act. Amanda, sitting in the front row next to Jerry and dozens of Lebanon residents, typed every word into her laptop. Her blood had become a national movement, connecting hundreds of victims of similar tactics across the country. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Walsh began, "what we have here is not just a case of arson or intimidation. It is a systematic attack on the very fabric of our communities. Mr. Wilson and his associates didn't just try to destroy the Harrison property. They tried to erase our history, our traditions, and our values." The evidence presented was overwhelming: recovered emails, financial records, testimony from former employees, and David Thompson's detailed confessions painted a devastating picture of institutionalized corruption. Barbara Shen testified about how she lost not only her store, but decades of family history preserved in irreplaceable antiques. Robert Winters, still visibly shaken, described the psychological terror of constant harassment. Each additional testimony reinforced the pattern of abuse and manipulation. During cross-examination, Richard Palmer, now witness for the prosecution after his cooperation agreement, revealed the existence of an unofficial corporate manual. It was called the Accelerated Acquisition Protocol. He explained it detailed exactly how to pressure resistant owners, first fines, then accidents, and finally offers they couldn't refuse. William watched the jury as the evidence piled up. He saw expressions of shock turn to indignation, then to determination. Lebanon was a small town where people still cared about each other, where a handshake was still worth as much as a contract. On her lunch break, Amanda met her father on the courthouse steps. "Look at this," she said, showing him her cell phone. Hundreds of messages were arriving from all over the country, families sharing similar stories, offering support, thanking the Harrisons for having the courage to fight. "Your mother would be proud," said William, hugging his daughter. "She always said that doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing." When the trial resumed, Susan presented her closing argument with the precision of a surgeon. What happened to the Harrisons was not an isolated incident. It was the product of a system designed to crush small business owners in the name of corporate profit. Today, you have the opportunity not only to bring justice to one family, but to send a clear message: our communities are not for sale. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, a surprisingly short time for such a complex case. When the verdict was read out, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Charles Wilson was found guilty of all charges. The sentence included not only imprisonment, but also the dissolution of the Maple Creek Development Corporation and full restitution to all identified victims. Even more significant were the ramifications of the case. The Indiana Attorney General's office announced a special task force to investigate similar abuses throughout the state. Congress began hearings on the need for greater regulation of HOAs. The Harrison v. Maple Creek case became a reference in law schools weeks later. On a quiet afternoon at the farm, William and Amanda sat on the porch watching the reclaimed fields. The red barn, silent witness to so many battles, was still standing stronger than ever. "What now?" asked Amanda, who had decided to postpone her law school plans to help out on the farm. "Now," William smiled, picking up an envelope from the table. "Now we're going to expand. Susan helped negotiate the purchase of the land where Barbara's store used to be. We're going to turn that space into a local farmer's market." Jerry appeared at the entrance of the property, followed by a group of neighbors. They were carrying tree seedlings and tools. "We thought we'd help replant that burned area," he said, "to turn something bad into something good." As he watched the community work together, William thought of his father, his grandfather, of all the generations of Harrison people who had cultivated not just crops, but values. The land had been tested by fire, but as always happens in agriculture, after destruction comes rebirth. "You know what else I've learned from all this?" said Amanda, helping to plant a young apple tree. "That sometimes you have to lose something to realize how much it's worth fighting for." William nodded, his calloused hands sinking into the familiar earth. The battle was over, but the legacy of courage, perseverance, and justice would live on in the stories Lebanon would tell for generations. And somewhere he knew his wife was smiling, proud to see that the values she held so dear were still alive and strong, rooted not just in the earth, but in the hearts of those who chose to make a difference.